Well, welcome to part 3. I'm really honored if you sat through all the way through part 1 and 2. I was asked to tell stories. They said, tell your story about where you went from being a dentist to doing what you are now, trying to help people breathe. How did that happen? Who were your teachers? What did you learn? And tell the story, if you can, of why we as a species are in such a desperate situation where half of us can't breathe and we're breathing ourselves to extinction. We're the sickest we've ever been. We're eating the worst diet on the face of the planet. And children born today are not going to live as long as their parents. So what happened anthropologically and culturally to create these changes? And then from the point of view of this whole system, this craniofacial respiratory system we're talking about, what used to happen that made it develop correctly? What's happened so that we're not developing correctly? How does that affect structure, function, and behavior? Why are we so sick and tired? And what can we do? I mean, it appears that we are indeed breeding ourselves to extinction. And the whole point of this movement is for us to identify these problems, learn from each other, educate the public, and try to change healthcare in this country from a disease management protocol to one that actually promotes health preventively through establishing functional nasodiaphragmatic breathing. That's a huge goal. I didn't think I'd see it happen in my lifetime, but I'm very encouraged by what's happening now. So that's what the first 2 parts of this 3-part series talked about. Now we get to the fun part. Now we get to the inspirational part, for me at least, that will show you why we're doing the things we've tried, the results we've had with so many people, how incredibly rewarding it is to see these changes in people, and why we're going to keep on doing this as long as we can, and why we hope other people will begin to develop some type of business model for this type of conservative approach to transforming patients, so that sooner or later doctors will understand it, dentists will understand it, the insurance industry will understand it, and it'll actually be able to be a situation in the future where it's possible to make a living by helping people breathe correctly. So it's really been a thrill for the last 20 years to be involved with this. I've made the greatest friends I'll ever have in my life. Dentistry has gone from being a wonderful profession to a calling, because I believe we're all part of dentistry in a situation now where there is no difference between dentistry and medicine. Dentistry is leading the movement to understanding, recognition, diagnosis, and correction of these problems for the greater good, not for our good, not to see how much money we can make, but to help save one patient at a time and to help save mankind. So now we'll get to the fun part here. Let me go find how to share the screen, and we'll look at stories of patients that we have helped. Let's start up our slideshow. And here we are. This is video number 3. That's my name. That's my email address. If you want to get in touch with me, I'll be happy to talk. So the title of this whole presentation, and you've probably seen all of my face you want to see, so I'm going to go away for a while and just talk, and I hope you'll find this informative and entertaining, and maybe it will help motivate some of you to continue along this road. As we talk about 2020 breathing, if there was ever a time for good breathing, it's 2020, where we're dying by the droves from COVID, and it's because we can't breathe correctly. We have brought this upon ourselves. We need to breathe from our nose to our diaphragm. And this has been and will be, especially in this volume. These are stories from the road on the walks to wellness, including mine. And so finally we're getting to the fun part at last. I mean, I can hear Etta James singing, "At last, you're gonna see some folks." Well, that's what we're gonna do. And we can do a whole lot of talking, and we can show a lot of pictures, and we can talk about what we think might work and what we've done in the past. But the proof ain't in the verbiage and the philosophy and the techniques. It's in the pudding. So let's see if we can show some results that to me are very encouraging and that I hope will get you thinking. Let's show and tell stories of patients and friends from 4 to 84 who have benefited from the guidance of our team, and it takes a team. You'll figure that out right away. Combined with their own hard work and determination to take the walk to wellness. But first, let's go back with a pupil. 1976, I said, I'm going to be a pupil. I want to see if I can keep on learning. What could it hurt? So what has the pupil learned? Nice selfie. What's he learned now that he's a semi-worn out old fart? Well, after trying to learn more during the last 44 years of my 50-year practice, what do I know for sure? Not much. What do I now know for sure that I didn't know in Chicago in 1976 after 4 days at the Operative and Restorative Academy meetings? Sitting there trying to listen and understand humbling and intimidating lectures in what seemed to be a foreign tongue given by the smartest and best dentist in the world. It was really intimidating. I walked out on a Pete Dawson lecture because he said you got a whole practice full of people with TMD problems, and I thought, well, I don't, so I walked out. Well, I just didn't know how to look for them. They're there. What has this journey taught me? Well, it's taught me that the bigger they are, the nicer they are. I learned that from my daddy at the first Restorative Academy meeting in 1970, because I was sitting there between two icons of the profession who wrote 2 of my textbooks from dental school. Intimidating. He said, no, they'll talk to you. They'll be happy to meet you. These big shots will happily and freely teach you, support you, and become your lifelong friends and colleagues. Same for their spouses. Just ask my wife. We've made the wonderful relationships with these people over the last decades, and we have some of our best friends from all over the world. I learned that taking the road of the hard right instead of the easy wrong provides spiritual rewards far exceeding the worth of any financial rewards. And if you're getting into helping people breathe, you're seeing this already. You're making sacrifices. It takes time. You may not be making a lot of money, but you're really helping people, and you can see how important this is and that it is our future. I also know that somehow we are all connected, which ends up making things happen how and when they should. Just every day we have learned something that we needed to know so that the next patient who came in with a problem showed me exactly why I needed to know that day. And finally, I've learned that those who say God doesn't speak to them just aren't listening. Now, this is a little autistic girl adopted by a wonderful young lady with severe heart problems. And she has a sister, and both of them are autistic. And both of them have this kind of recessive faith. Both of them have developmental problems. And through past experience with Tracy Brizendine in Austin, Texas, and through connections between this little girl's grandparents who live here in Shreveport, we were able to all get her together in Austin, Texas to have this little girl's tongue released, and to have her helped along the road to wellness. That's just somehow we're all connected. And indeed, children can be helped. This is Slattery, sent to my hygienist, Paula Watkins, who is the first oral myofunctional therapist in Louisiana. Sent to Paula to see if Paula could help her after she'd had her tongue released. She still had breathing and sleeping and behavior problems. And you can see she's got poor eyesight. I contend that her basic cranium never developed in all three dimensions. And so the housing for her ocular apparatus never developed correctly. And this is why she has vision problems. I would love to see at the end of her treatment if she can have her arches expand and develop, if it also clears up her vision problems. But I'm being like Jeff Rouse and saying, could this problem be an airway problem? Well, I think it could be. That book from 100 years ago, the doctor said that breathing problems, underdevelopment of the face and the maxilla can create hearing problems. I think they can create vision problems also. So here she is doing her Buteyko breathing, desperate, very faithfully walking down the hall with Paula. She got her nose closed up, doing her breathing exercises. And here she can happily breathe through her nose with her mouth taped, which she couldn't do when she got here. I had nothing to do with this. This was all Paula. This little girl is a whole lot better. This is Abby. She was sent to us by a psychiatric, pediatric resident at LSU for her ADHD problems after I gave my original talk there. And you can see she's biretronathic. She's got vertical maxillary excess. She's got a low scalloped tongue. She's got a restricted frenum. So she had her tongue released and did 5 months of myofunctional therapy with Paula. And you can see the differences in her. You can remember, these pictures are all made with the same camera and the same lighting. You can see a little development. Her mandible's coming forward. Her lower face is coming forward. She's lifting up her face. Her facial color is better. She's not showing as much gum tissue as she was before. Her eyes are starting to look a little more rested. Her tongue is moved up. And she no longer is restricted. And has this helped her? Well, initially, this child is sleepy, exhausted, unhappy, focused, has poor facial color, and is drenched with perspiration from her dysautonomia. Her sympathetic nervous system is running amok, and she can't behave, she can't sleep, she can't concentrate. She's an unhappy child. And here, after being helped by Paula, she's fully awake and alert and rested. She's relaxed and happy, and she shows improvement in her facial color and condition. So just what we can look at makes us think, well, she's doing better. Well, what about her history? Before, she was on daily Focalin for ADHD. She was seeing a psychiatrist for her behavioral problems. She couldn't focus. She couldn't get her homework done. She had phonetic problems. She couldn't say words with L. She sounded like Tom Brokaw. She had a low tongue posture. She breathed from her mouth to her thorax, used her intercostal muscles. She wasn't breathing from her diaphragm. She couldn't swallow correctly. She was failing at school. She snored at night with her mouth open. And then after rather simple treatment and her own hard work, this was years ago. I think she's finally off her meds, but she was still taking the meds at that time, but no longer had to see the psychiatrist. She had much better focus. She was turning her homework in on time. She now could say L sounds and make all necessary phonetic sounds. Her tongue now lives in the roof of her mouth. She breathes from her diaphragm. She can swallow. She's making B's and C's instead of D's and F's. She doesn't snore, and her lips are sealed. I'd call that a success. Now, if you've seen the wonderful video finding Connor Deegan, about a young man helped by Kevin Boyd and his team, a young man who couldn't breathe, had oppositional defiant disorder, had all kinds of problems, and had some pretty miraculous treatment. Here's a patient very similar. And if you look at his picture with his father there, you got to ask the question, are these epigenetic problems he's got, or did he inherit this from his father, or is it both? And if you look at his face, he looks kind of sullen. His color's not good. He's got zits all over his face. He can't open his mouth wide. Back of his throat is sore. He's got a low tongue posture, Mallampati 4. His eyes look like he's just barely functioning. Can't stick out his tongue. He can lift his tongue pretty well though, but that's a restriction. He's 16 years old, he's snoring, he's got insomnia, he's got fatigue, he's got acne, he's hyperactive, he's got oppositional defiance disorder. His mother, who incidentally came to me as a patient about 20 years ago, and she'd had double jaw surgery for aesthetic reasons, but that brings up the genetic question, because if she had double jaw surgery, she indeed still has breathing problems that we are now helping her with years later. And she referred to Thomas as my bad child. He's just a bad child. He'd been expelled from 2 schools and he was currently failing. And he's an athlete, but when we did oximetry, his resting pulse rate is in 90s. That's what I call a shitstorm of dysautonomia. He's running on empty 24 hours a day. And could we help him by improving structure, function, and behavior? Could we? So we put him on a pod with tape. He had his tongue released. He did minimal myofunctional therapy, and allegedly he wore his pod and tape at night, but he's a teenage boy. You know, compliance is the big question. Compliance is the big question that's keeping current day modern orthodontists from wanting to adopt these principles, because both the child and the parents have to be on board if you're trying to really change them. So here he is. I think this is about 6 months later. His face is clearing up. His facial color's better. You know, his eyes don't look as tired as they did before. And he's not snoring, he doesn't have insomnia, his athletic performance has improved, his resting pulse is in the 60s. 60s. So I would say his autonomic nervous system has gone from a sympathetic allostatic hyperdrive into something approaching homeostasis. Not only is he no longer socially disruptive, his mother now refers to him as my great child. He's gone to making straight A's, and he's looking forward to having a career, and he's applying to school for college when he didn't even want to finish high school. I'd call that a success. That's very gratifying. All right, let's look at Richard. Richard, we've seen his eyes before. He's been my patient since he was 15 years old. My associate took out his 3rd molar in 72. He had a lot of decay as a kid and was really bad about breaking teeth and cracking teeth and needing crowns, but it took me until he was about 40 years old to realize, Richard, I don't think you're breathing too well. And we could tell that by when he just came in for a routine dental exam. I said, man, you look worn out. Do you sleep all right? Well, he woke up in the morning with sore jaws and sore teeth, and he tossed and turned all night, woke up with a headache. He had excessive daytime fatigue all day long, and he had irritable bowel syndrome. So these kind of got me thinking, yeah, maybe he's got some breathing issues. So August 16th, we started him just on a pod and tape, and trying to get him to breathe through his nose during the daytime, and all the kind of awareness the patient need to have to help change themselves. So here we see him in January. That's just what, less than a year later. Comes in for a regular examination, and wow, he's looking pretty good. And he doesn't have any jaw soreness. He's sleeping all night. He's got daytime energy. Doesn't have any headaches, and his irritable bowel syndrome is gone. At age 40, just from wearing a pod appliance, taping his mouth shut at night, trying to breathe through his nose. Structure, function, and behavior. And if you look at this movie of his eyes, this is the first movie I ever made of a patient, and I believe I broke into tears when I saw it. Ron Perkins says the eyes, they're the window into the soul. Just look at the patient, and their eyes will tell you whether they're sick or not. Their eyes will also tell you whether they're well or not. Here he is going back to, here's what he looked like when he walked into that appointment where we noticed he had a problem. So we do some follow-up oximetry, and yeah, he's still got UARS. Heart's still going up and down some at night. So he's still having some breakthrough hypopneas. So probably needs his tongue released in myofunctional therapy, or does he? Well, he's happy. You know, that's going to have to be his decision. We'll see. So we try the most conservative thing we can, and we realize that perfection is the enemy of good enough. So any help we can do to help these patients help themselves is worthwhile. All right, here's Allison, been a patient for 46 years. And unfortunately, I participated in the early 70s. Her teeth were crowded, and I had my favorite orthodontist do retraction orthodontics on her. I just didn't know any better. And he really kept the anterior teeth where they belonged, didn't screw up the way she looked. But it further restricted her linguatorium, and she developed breathing problems that I really wasn't aware of until many years later. But she did have a habit of clenching all the time, having TMD, myofascial pain, splitting teeth, and needing implants, all of which was her body's response to try to deal with the fact she couldn't breathe. So there she was, I guess about 3 years ago. We said, well, let's see if we can help you. And so we put her on a pod tape, breathing exercises. She learned the exercises from Paula. Dr. Banker released her tongue, and she did myofunctional therapy. And here she is after 7 months. This is a lady in her 60s now. She look different to you? Does she look 3 years older or 3 years younger? This stuff is exciting. Okay, now we get to Nova Dawn. I learned so much from Nova Dawn. At the time, the only tool I had was a tap appliance, and I was working with the sleep doctors at LSU for CPAP in non-compliant patients. And Dave McCarty sent me this wonderful, brilliant Nova Dawn to see if we could help her with a tap appliance. She had had extraction, retraction orthodontics as an adolescent. She was diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea and was CPAP intolerant, and that's her first oximetry. And that's the first picture I took of her face. This was way before I started taking standardized pictures of the patient's faces and structures. But I thought, this is an unusual, challenging case. Maybe we should take pictures of this while we see what happens. And she's got tired eyes, and her upper lip is thin and everted because it doesn't have support back behind it. She's got a low scalloped tongue, and she can't lift it. So we were thinking that along whatever happens, probably going to need her tongue released. Now, as far as that retraction orthodontics, this is my good friend Bill Hang, who practices the orthotropics that he learned from John Mew, who is the English orthodontist archaeologist and race car driver and philosopher who really has opened the door to everything we're doing today by showing that he could develop faces on kids. Instead of taking out teeth and retracting them, he could actually grow them. And of course, he fell into disrepute by his peers in England because he had the temerity to suggest that he had a better way and that what they were doing was wrong, which of course is the story of all progress. So Bill calls this the ERS, the extraction and retraction regret syndrome, and he's done a lot in teaching techniques for taking patients like Novodon, opening the spaces back up orthodontically, not just opening the spaces, but putting everything in the face needs its place in space. So to put those things in the face back where they belong, so that the spaces that have been opened up can be restored with implant supported restorations. So we put her on a MyTap, and sure enough, it slows down. This is years ago. Made her sleeping better, but her TMD started hurting. Her temporomandibular joints started hurting. I will tell you today that if you put somebody on an MAD appliance and it hurts their joints, they've got a restricted tongue. If you put somebody on an MAD appliance trying to advance their mandible and it hurts their joints, they've got a restricted tongue. You better deal with that tongue before you get into other management. This is a sure sign that there's a restricted tongue and fascial adhesions that prevent repositioning of the tongue to open the airway. We try to drag it forward. It's like trying to stretch a rubber band that can't be stretched anymore because it's pulling in the opposite direction. So for her, we realized it is time to provide a linguatorium orthodontically and restoratively after freeing up her tongue to help. So my good friend Sanders Graff, wonderful young orthodontist, took her from this situation on the top to the one in the bottom, and you can see at the end of her treatment, before we restored her implants, she looks like a totally different person. Now, he took these pictures with the same lighting and the same camera. She's different. She's better. Remember, the gold standard for outcomes is how do you look, how do you sleep, and how do you feel? And she looks better, feels better, and sleeps better. So in 2014, that's what her face looked like. Here's a picture made with the same camera, same exposure 3 years later. That's a different face, different color, no more sagging tissue. Circles under her eyes are better. She's grown some lips. She's gone from minimal tongue opening to fully opening with her tongue in the position. That's the way you test. First way to test for a restriction is have them open as wide as they can, measure that, then have them plant that tongue on the incisive papilla, not let it move, and open as wide as they can. And you can see before treatment, she was really restricted. Now she's not. That shows harmonious work of all the muscles that are involved now. And you can see really differences in her faces and in her face, and she's got more lips now because she's got support behind it. So that was her starting orthodontics. That was the finishing orthodontics before restoration of the implants. So let's see a little movie of her face changing. It's really more interesting to watch these, watch them go in and out a few times. Let's play that again. Her eyeglasses disappear as her face gets better and she looks more awake. Now let's see, it's the going back that's interesting. Look at her face getting pale, losing definition. Look at her eyes getting tired. You can see the incredible change. These movies are just really mind-blowing. Different lady. Anything going on around her eyes? The base of her nose is getting bigger. That's her maxilla developing there. as she wakes up. And here she goes back to pale and sickly. Big difference. Let's look down here in the money shot. Her nasolabial folds are getting smaller. Her nostrils are getting wider. She's growing lips. Her facial symmetry is improving. Look at her facial color when it started. Look at the inflammation in her skin and her lips. Let's watch that one again. Positive change as she gets 3 years older. And this, what she would have looked like when we started if we hadn't done anything. Dramatic. And it takes a lot of work. These are just some of the casts involved in doing all of that. There we're restoring the implants. And if we look at her symptoms, again, how do you look? How do you sleep? Well, I look better. How do you feel? I feel great. How do you sleep? I sleep great. Well, when you say you feel better, what about those 19 symptoms you had before we started? Let's keep up with them. Well, 19 of her symptoms of her comorbidities, her general sensitization syndrome, her lifetime of chronic inflammatory disease, 19 symptoms have improved or resolved. And she could teach this to anybody. All right, here's Lynn. This lady is in her 60s. She was referred to me by a wonderful chiropractor who has helped so many of our patients. She was snoring, was fatigued, had upper airway resistance syndrome, had a tired face from clenching her jaws all day and all night. So we put her on a pod, we put her on tape. She worked on changing her tongue position. She had a phoenectomy, only did a few myofunctional therapy sessions with Paula. Started sleeping with the pod and tape, seeing her chiropractor. And 3 months later, she just came by for some reason, I can't remember. And here's her change in 3 months. Look at her waking up, changing her head position, her facial color. She's actually growing an airway. She's growing her nasal airway and cheekbones. That's what she looked like 3 months earlier. Here's a 65-year-old lady getting 3 months older. Let's look at it one more time. Here's where she started. Gee, I'm rested. My head's coming up, breathing through my nose, growing an airway. My eyes look good. I sleep good. Now I'm smiling. I sure am glad that we did something so I don't look and feel like that anymore. Here's Dr. Eric, 2015. Been a patient since day one. His parents were my father's patients. His brothers are our patients. What's going on with Dr. Eric? Made a lot of casts. You can see over on the left are his original casts from the 70s. Then he started cracking teeth and decided he really wanted onlays on all his back teeth so he wouldn't crack them. Of course, we weren't looking at why. And you can see those casts with gold painted on them. Those are onlays we made about 30 years ago. Then you can see the cast we made for his first tap appliance. And then you can see the cast we made to treat him with Homeoblocks. And then you can see the cast we made at the end. So this is a diagnostic cast history of his treatment. He's one of 3 physician brothers who all have the same structural, functional airway issues with symptoms. That's Eric. My picture was made after treatment, before we released his tongue. Today we would release the tongue first. But when we started treating him, the idea of releasing somebody's tongue was still pretty damn controversial. That's his older brother, Ryan, who's worse off than he is. And he's wearing a pod and tape, but needs his tongue released, won't let me do it. There's the younger brother, Scotch, who's got the same problems and is on a potentate, but won't let us release his tongue yet. So Eric's the only one we've really been able to help. The other two are doing better. So we had to come up with our own stationery for these guys, the Badly Breathing Bignell Brothers. So Eric, his initial symptoms, back 2012, he had a lab diagnosis after a sleep study that he was fine. His AHI was less than 5. Dr. Eric, you don't have sleep apnea, you're doing just fine, you just need a little sleep hygiene. He's not fine, and he needed a hell of a lot more than sleep hygiene. But his physicians had said, we can't fix you, go find somebody who can. Actually, they didn't tell him that, but I looked at him and said, maybe we can help you. Of course, it took 35 years of seeing him as a patient before I recognized his problems. So he was snoring at night and bugged the hell out of his wife, and also bothered her because he had restless leg syndrome, and he'd wake her up snoring and he'd kick her in his sleep. And he'd wake up with a jerk. And he'd wake up, he'd sweat so much at night that he'd have to get up and change pajamas sometimes twice every night. Boy, that's the sympathetic nervous system running amok. Had restless sleep, didn't sleep well, but he only had to get up. 2 very interesting things. Number 1, he didn't have to pee a lot at night, and number 2, his heart rate would tend to slow down at night instead of speeding up. I think that's that reflex we're talking about, where clenching the teeth creates bradycardia, and it's the body's attempt to slow the heart during sympathetic activity. He didn't have any dreams. And if people repeat their sleep cycles, they're going to dream and they're going to remember it. So if he doesn't remember his dreams, he probably has N2 inversion. He's probably kicking right back up into light sleep. So he's probably not getting any good restorative sleep. His hands shake. He also has jerking in his muscles, and he really thought he had Lou Gehrig's disease, but was tested and found out he didn't. He had hypotension and bradycardia. We usually see hypertension and rapid heart rate in these people. Everybody's different. But 3 times he fainted, hit his head, went to the ER, and had to have CT scans. And when he was sitting in his cardiologist's office during I'm going to get it out. During a carotid massage, he basically died. He flatlined, and they had to jump start him with the paddles. So something not right with his heart. He's plagued with fibromyalgia, especially in his shoulder, which is interesting since he is a physiatrist. He is a doctor of rehabilitative medicine, many of whom tell women that fibromyalgia is just in their minds. And he knows for a fact that it isn't, because his shoulder hurts all the time. He'd wake up with a backache, he had a headache in the afternoon, he's worn out all day, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he would chug a 12-ounce Coke just to try to wake him up so he could finish his day. His hands and feet were so cold, and that's peripheral vasoconstriction from sympathetic hyperactivity. When he'd touch his patients, they would recoil from the coldness of his hands. Other than that, he had no symptoms, except for irritable bowel syndrome. So he doesn't have sleep apnea. Sleep breathing couldn't be the problem. What if we address that? What if we address his breathing 24 hours a day? Maybe it'll improve his sleep, and could it possibly help with any of these other things? And if so, if we're going to try this, let's take a picture to see how he looks before we start. And let's take a cone beam CT scan that'll help us in our diagnosis. And then maybe we can take one at the end of treatment, and maybe there'll be some measurable differences. So that's what we did. He had worn a TAP appliance and a MyTAP appliance, and they really helped him a lot with the night sweats and helped him sleep better. But he began to have that bite change. And so that's when we decided, well, We can manage him. We're not really getting him well. He's sleeping better, but I don't think a mandibular advancement appliance is his answer anymore. What if we can address structure, function, and behavior, grow him a linguatorium, and release his tongue? Although we weren't even thinking about releasing his tongue then. We were just trying to make room for it and teach it how to work. So here he is when we first started him with his Homeoblocks. You can still see all this inflammation in his face at the time. So this one, I think we treated him for 18 months. And I remember I said, here's how we should look at study casts. If you look at the one on the left, now just imagine where the tongue is living and what it's doing. Look at the one on the left, look at the linguatorium on the right. You can see some differences. If you look at the lingual of the lower jaw, you can see it just looks like the tongue is inhabiting more space there. And if you look at the palate, you can see those rugae have smoothed out and that tongue is living up there in the roof of the mouth, and the tongue has helped create a better linguatorium, along with all the things he did, including wearing Homeoblocks at night, which stimulated stem cell growth and primarily the growth of the maxilla, with the mandible following along. Well, let's look at his pictures before and after. Well, these are just before. And his treatment, first, patient education, Homeoblocks, 15 weeks of myofunctional therapy, mouth taping at night, frenectomy, after which he wore a pod and tape. And again, now we would do the tongue first. We're constantly learning. So does he look any different? Well, here he is waking up. Good God Almighty. I fell out of my chair when I saw this one for the first time. Let's just look at that one more time. Here he is waking up, sitting forward, face getting different, face growing, color changing, eyes opening up. And here's what he looked like when we were just managing him with the tap appliance. I think there's some very subjective and objective improvement there. And usually we just look at patient from time to time, and we may not notice these changes as they happen gradually. Although, again, if we're just looking at his eyes, we can see in the tissue around his eyes and looking at his nose and his cheekbones and his alertness, a lot of change going on there. And if we look at his lower face, you can see the CRFC developing and coming forward. He's growing some lips. Look at his face changing. Look at the symmetry of his face. Look at everything collapsing back to where it was as he was sick when we started. That's where we got him with the tap. Let's watch his eyes changing. This looks like a zombie coming back from the dead to me. These photos are not doctored, folks. Same camera, same lighting, different patient. There he was when we started. So here's what the frenectomy looks like. It really creates a big open wound so that he can do this. So let's take a look at the cone beam CT scans. Before we started, if we're looking at an area that might collapse, a pinch point, a Starling resistor, especially if he's lying on his back with that low tongue position and he gets into REM sleep, gravity and atonia allow the jaw to fall back, taking the tongue with it. Those are probably the most likely 3 points where there might be an obstruction. Plus, if there happens to be any kind of obstruction to airway flow in his nose. So these are the areas we would like to see, to take a look at, to see, well, has there been any positive change? And so if we look at the cone beam CT made 2 years later, you can see some changes there. There are no pinch points. He's got better airway tone. His tongue's up where it belongs. Now, if we open that up just a little bit, we're talking about pinch points. Those are Starling resistors. That's a tube that's been constricted, and at that point of constriction, it has a huge effect over the fluid dynamics of what's going through that tube. And if we look at Bernoulli's principle, if we're talking now about getting rid of a pinch point and opening it up a little bit, what kind of improvement, and we're talking about the airway now, what kind of improvement can we get by opening it just a little bit? I mean, the big movement is, let's grow a bigger airway. Well, that's got to help. You're going to move better air, more air through a bigger airway, and this will explain why size matters. But also, if you have toning of the muscles of the airway so they're less likely to collapse, that will also have a great effect. So let's see if we can moderately increase the airway size, tone the airway, and see if we can create ideal laminar airflow from the nose to diaphragm and back. Well, what Poiseuille tells us is that if you increase the diameter of the airway, it's going to provide better, faster airflow. That makes sense. And if we actually, forgive me, we were looking at Bernoulli's principle, not Poiseuille's. Bernoulli says bigger is better. Air is going to move through that tube better. Water, any fluid is going to move through a bigger pipe better if you eliminate the constriction. Poiseuille, however, did some phenomenal math. And what it means to us is that if we open the diameter of the airway 4 millimeters, that reduces turbulence, establishes laminar airflow, and increases the amount of airflow as if we had opened it 16 millimeters. 16 millimeters. So if we can tone the airway and open it up just a little bit, it's going to have a dramatic effect on how efficiently air gets in and out, in the nose, into the body, into the lungs, into the blood, into the brain, and then back out through the nose. So this is what I call as galloping CT scan. You can see a movie made of before and after, and you can see the tongue moving up and forward. And as it moves up and forward, the airway opens up better in the back. And then you can see a lot more definition in the airway. Not only is it getting bigger, look how sharp it's getting. That's because those muscles have become toned. And back here, they were flabby. So there's documentable improvement in the tongue position, in the volume and the toning of the airway. So let's look at this view, and we can see in this movie, as everything's growing, the palate's expanding, you can see the tongue moving up. You can also, if you're paying attention, see changes going on in the nasal capsule. So just from the dental, Jeff Rouse says just do the dentistry. Well, here's the dentistry. We're wearing a Homeoblock appliance from a dental approach, and we're growing a bigger palate. We're bringing the tongue up into it. So from the intraoral position point of view, we're doing an improvement. But to me, this is where medicine and dentistry are no longer the same. We've always said that the airway is the key to facial development. And the maxilla is basically the airway. All of that stuff in green is the maxilla. It supports the orbit. It's the main part of the external nose. It's not just the part of the upper jaw that holds the teeth. That's the key. Well, let's take a look at what happens when his maxilla grows. A doctor might have said beforehand, you know, you've got stuff in your sinuses and you've got obstructed nasal flow. Maybe we ought to go in and ream all of that out. And maybe if we reamed it out, it would help with your nasal breathing. All right, let's take a look again. That's where we started. He's got stuff in his sinuses. He's got stuff in his sinuses, and that over there on the left side, it looks like the airflow might really be constricted. But look, I tried to make the same cut here. Look at the changes in 18 months. That to me looks like a clearer sinuses, a bigger and better airway that's going to create better laminar flow into what's now a toned airway. That's different. That's not just dentistry. Now, he started out with a collapsible airway. If you look at the pictures on the left, up above, that's where his tongue was down low. And if you look at the image, let me back that up. All right, on the left series of pictures, the one on the bottom is a virtual pharyngioscopy. What we're doing is, Dr. Belfour made this for me, from the preoperative CT scan. We're climbing over the tongue, looking down into the throat, and you can see how rough looking the tongue is. And that white thing we're seeing is the epiglottis. And we're seeing how rough and collapsible it is. We're looking at the back of the airway, and we can see how stippled and rough and collapsible it is. And then we look at the end result. First, we look at the CT scan pictures, which obviously shows these differences. Now, if we climb back over the tongue again on the lower right side, the tongue looks smooth, epiglottis looks smooth, airway looks open, back of the throat looks smooth. We've got a toned airway. People don't talk about this much. It's very important. If you look in the axial dimension, we can see he has a bigger airway in the axial dimension. And this is what the surgeons like to do, to show on the left side his total airway volume. At the top was 18 cc's, now it's 26. And his minimum airway area is now much bigger. So all of that is positive documentation of changes in structure and function. Well, what about behavior, and has it helped him any in his symptoms? Well, we had all these symptoms when we started with. Let's compare them now. He's not snoring anymore. He doesn't have restless legs. He's not waking up at night. He's not sweating at night, except when he had a cold a few months ago, but I don't think he's having colds anymore. Instead of restless sleep, he has restful sleep. He doesn't have to urinate at all at night. He's remembered his dreams, which tells us he's completing that racetrack around that cycle, N1, N2, N3 rim. Got to do it. Now he's doing it. Before he was into inversion, his body and brain couldn't fix itself. His hands aren't shaking anymore. His muscles aren't twitching. Now he's got a pacemaker that keeps him up to 70 beats per minute. He hasn't had any blackouts since we started treating him. Why is that? Maybe his baroreceptor status is better. He had fibromyalgia in a few places, doesn't have any pain anymore, doesn't have a morning backache, doesn't have an afternoon headache. He's got plenty of daytime energy. He doesn't have to drink the Coke. He's lost about 20 pounds now. His patients no longer recoil from his hands, and he has normal GI function with no cramping. So, the gold standard, how do you look? Boy, he looks better. How do you sleep? I'm sleeping great. How do you feel? Well, here's how he feels. I'd call that a success, and it's really a privilege to be part of being able to help people like this. Here is a tough case. This is sweet Kathy. Kathy was sent to us by her chiropractor again, because she was in such discomfort, and he thought it was related to her tongue and her breathing problems, and hoped we could do something to help her. So this is sweet Kathy. Kathy was referred to us by Dr. Venden, the wonderful chiropractor. She is probably our biggest challenge so far, and one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in my life. If you look at her on the left side, that's the day she came to see us. She is sick, her nose is infected, she is tired, she's desperate. And Kathy is a brilliant, highly educated school teacher who is a little bit on the autistic spectrum, which meant that we were going to have to take lots and lots of very slow care to get her to trust us and to help her a little bit at a time as she could adapt to it. She was hypersensitive. First time she sat in my chair, she made me close the blinds because the reflection of the sunlight off the bird feeder outside the window was bothering her. And then we had to adjust the temperature in the room to where it was just right, using some blankets and air conditioning. And I had to turn off the music that plays in our office so she wouldn't be distracted by the music. But she was in desperate need, desperately wanted help, and was willing to do what it took. So I think this is about when I first started using this camera. If you look at the pictures on the top, we can see that her right side of her face is less developed. We can see that she has a low and scalloped tongue that she can't lift. She can't stick her tongue out, and she can't lift it. I told her that picture on the lower right side that her tongue looked like a hot dog and it ought to be pointed. And if you look at her eyes, once again, she can't hide her tired eyes. So what was her history? She had 4 bicuspids taken out and retractive orthodontics as an adolescent. She, I guess, is about 45 years old when we meet her, and she was diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea 8 years before. Couldn't wear a CPAP, so they did UPPP surgery. That didn't help either. And people really don't want to have that surgery, especially if they're going to need things advanced later. They've got scar tissue from that surgery. Also, when you cut out the back of the throat and the uvula, you destroy a lot of the body's built-in baroreceptors that help process everything that's going on in that oral cavity. And she was easily distracted by external stimuli. She said, I just never can remember any time in my life where I felt good. So we looked at these different things that we can see. There's her restricted tongue. So what do? We started April 2017 with a pod. And after we already got her working on all let's develop an obsession about our posture, our head posture, our tongue posture, our mouth closed, breathing through our nose. We get them all working on that before we do anything. Because if they won't work on that, there's no point in trying to help them. And they're constantly working on it as we ease the way by greasing the wheels. With that work, we can probably succeed in helping them succeed. So she had a frenectomy and she did OMT with Paula and Dr. Venden, the chiropractor center here, helped her with fascial releases and postural health after the frenectomy. So 3 months later, now this is not made with the same camera and the same lighting, but you can see what she looked like on her first visit. This is 3 months after her frenectomy. She's come in to see Paula. And this is a picture made with a cell phone. Now, look at the change. Look at her eyes. Look at her facial repose. Look at the fact that she's gone from desperate and fatigued to serene looking. That's just in a few months. So, a year later into treatment, and this took a long time. She's dreaming now. She can chew more efficiently because she's been working on it, because her tongue works. She now knows how to swallow correctly, and she no longer dreads getting up in the morning. She pops out of bed, which tells us she's getting restorative sleep, and she is sleeping better. Her nasal passages are clearer, so we started her on Homeoblocks. Because if we look at the CBCT, you can see where her tongue needed to be brought up and forward. You can see a deviated septum in the nose and limited airflow. So it'd be nice to correct her terrible occlusion after her failed orthodontics, to develop better facial symmetry, and really, if we can, to develop an expanded nasal airway for her. And we want to create room for her tongue in the palate as the tongue is now moving to come up and forward with the mouth closed to conduct the business of life. So there are her casts and her Homeoblocks. The biggest bite block is on the right side because that's the less developed side. So let's look at casts from 2015, the way I said we should look at them. Look at 2019. You see any difference? I do. Just imagine you're the tongue. Into which one of those linguatoria are you going to fit better? The one on the right. So you can see definite improvement in her arch form and her palate, the shape of her vault, and tongue space. So that was her original oximetry in 2017. That's when we had started her out on with her mouth taped and with Breathe Right, and she was still having breakthrough hypopneas. And in 2019, she went from having 208 3% events an hour to 67. Her SpO2 time below 90 went from 6.5% to 0.1%. And her low SpO2 went from 82% to 88%. And her average SpO2 went up from 92 to 93%. So she's breathing better. She's not having desats. And her heart rate has dropped way down. Still not perfect because during REM sleep, you have sympathetic activity. But according to these metrics, she's a hell of a lot better. And if we look at all of her symptoms beforehand, all the places that were checked on the left originally are now better. And Paula written in how much better she's doing in different situations. But again, she looks better. Her oximetry shows she's better. And the symptom sheets show that she's improving. So here's an email she wrote me during treatment. The outer corners of my eyes are up and my eyes are bigger. I was wondering if you wanted the original, no, this is at the end of treatment. I was wondering if you wanted the original pod and the Homeoblocks for your presentations or just for reference as you and others continue to make discoveries, because she's well aware of what's going on in this field and spends a lot of time catching up on it on the internet. I can't begin to thank you and your wonderful group of ladies for all you have done for me. Your contributions to the field of dentistry and human health in general is huge. Boy, does that feel good. We're just trying to help one person at a time. But the reason we're doing these videos is we hope we can all help one person at a time. I know you will continue to advance the field, and I have been blessed to have been a part of the journey. You hold a very special place in my heart. Love, Kathy. Now, I'm getting emotional. Nobody ever told me that when I fixed their teeth. And then an addendum to that email. I forgot to mention a very interesting aspect of our association. I have absolutely no memory of how I ever got your name to contact you. I think it was divine intervention. Those who say God doesn't talk to them just aren't listening. Everything that happens for a reason, and somehow we're all connected. Kathy's story is definitely a lesson in my life that confirms those beliefs. For us to succeed in helping patients transform their breathing personalities, the patients must do the work. We've already said that. And it doesn't matter how old they are. This is Eugene. What a great guy. He was diagnosed with, with obstructive sleep apnea 2013. His AHI was 6.1, excuse me, which is mild sleep apnea, which means absolutely nothing. You only need to quit breathing one time and it's all over. He has no N3 sleep, so he's not getting any restorative sleep. He tried to wear a CPAP for 5 years. He couldn't stand it. And he was referred by his physician. He weighed 213 pounds. And we look at the original oximetry, and it's not good. If we look at the oximetry, 2 different nights. First night, he's below 90, 44% of the time, going down to 83, 35 events an hour. Second night, he had 238, 3% events, spent 27% of the night below 90. And if you look at his SpO2, he's got apnea. And if you look at his heart rate, he's got a low resting heart rate, but it's challenged all night. And if you look at that on the lower right side, that spiking of the heart rate during REM sleep, during the last REM cycle, is where people die peacefully in their sleep. Because what happens is, you shouldn't be releasing adrenaline all night, except adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol for that matter. Shouldn't be releasing them at night. Parasympathetic nervous system should be working. But there is some sympathetic activity during REM sleep, which makes it such a critical portion of the night. However, before that last REM body is getting ready to wake up, and our HPA axis is already beginning to release these stimulant glucocorticoids to wake us up to deal with the day. So if we're also having an apneic event at the same time, that combination of the outflux of these stimulants may be the big one that kills us in our sleep. So he was in bad shape. So we saw him on August the 17th. We could see he had a really restricted tongue. He's got a lot of old worn out dentition. Didn't really have enough teeth to support a tap appliance. You can see he has Mallampati 4, back of his throat is red, tongue looks too big for his mouth, and if you see a deep fissure like that, that means that that tongue is restricted all the way back. That's a posterior tongue tie. And he can't lift up his tongue, he can't point it, he can't extend it, he can't lift it. So we know he's got a tongue that's in trouble. His tongue is also scalloped, which we see because at night it's pressing against the lingual surfaces of the maxillary teeth and leaving an impression there when it should be living up within the confines of the maxillary teeth. And you can see he's got a red oropharynx because he's breathing at night. And he's what, 81, 84 years old. So what do? He wants help. So we give him patient education, get him thinking about these things, give him a pod appliance with bite block on the less developed side, add some nighttime mouth taping with Buteco tape. Then after Paula showed him how to do the exercises, Dr. Banker did a lingual frenectomy, and then he did 15 weeks of myofunctional therapy with Paula. So after 15 weeks of myofunctional therapy, what a difference in his oximetry. Even his pulmonologist said, you're breathing better, what's going on? He's lost 20 pounds. So does age matter? This man's in his mid-80s, and look at the difference in him between October and December. He has been totally transformed, and I had very little to do with it. I think Paula made him help himself as much as possible. We cannot do this without myofunctional therapists and other therapists. We cannot do this alone. But working as a team doesn't seem like it matters much if you look at these stories, how old the patient is. Just depends on what kind of structural changes we're trying to affect. If we want to promote better structure, earlier is always better. So here's a nice email he sent me. If you'll notice, he calls it breathing and sleeping disorder, not sleep disordered breathing. He says, I want to thank you and Paula for your help with my breathing problems. As we discussed, I had 3 goals. I didn't want to depend on my CPAP. I haven't used the CPAP for a year. Dr. Howard, my pulmonary doctor, who interestingly is an osteopath, and the osteopaths are really the ones who have the key, because let's think about what is the key to modern medicine. It's first, identify a symptom, 2, manage the symptom. In chiropractic and osteopathic medicine, there are 2 tenets. The first is identify the restriction. Number 2 is release the restriction. And that's what we're trying to do is osteopathic medicine. We need more osteopaths. Anyway, my pulmonary doctor checked my breathing functions, told me my tests were better than they were a year ago when I started my treatments. My second goal was to sleep better. I'm more rested in the morning. Notice that my bed covers are not messed up like they were before. Remember, that's, if you're looking at a kid and you look at their bed in the morning, it's all messed up, they can't breathe. My third goal was to lose weight. I've lost more than 20 pounds. I plan to continue the exercises Paula prescribed, very important, and I will keep you informed of any changes. Gene Hicks. Now that was some simple treatment, and it has prolonged the quality and quantity of the life of this fine gentleman, and he looks better, he feels better, and he sleeps better. But we didn't get into this just to help him sleep better at night. So this is the walk towards wellness in progress. So I will now show the very last case. This is my friend Milton. Kind of grew up with Milton, didn't really know him. He went to local high school. I went off to school, but he married my wife's best friend, and we've gotten to be pretty good friends. Here's what he looked like in his 40s. And you can see he's showing too much upper teeth, and he's a little overweight, and his head's forward, and he's got breathing problems. Look at him in his 60s, and you can see what happens if you live 20 years with those breathing problems. Everything gets worse. But here's what he looks like now. Now, I don't know about you, but that's impressive. And he did the work. Boy, did he do the work. So, why am I seeing him? I'm seeing him because he'd come over to our house for dinner to watch football games, and I realized he was dying. And I knew he had some issues, and apparently everything that was happening wasn't helping him much. And so I said, look, if you'll give me a chance, I think we have some folks that we can work together and help you get better and feel better and sleep better and look better and live longer. He said, well, I'll give that a try. So what were his medical misadventures between the one on the left and the one on the right, which is what he looked like when he showed up in my office? 1989, he quit smoking. Then he started gaining weight, and his cholesterol went up. 1995, he was diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, which is pre-diabetes. And you'll see he's on that continuum we were talking about. The older and sicker he got because he couldn't breathe, the more symptoms he developed. 2011, he was diagnosed with diabetes and hypertension and high triglycerides. He had a sleep study in 2012, had a polysonogram that said he had obstructive sleep apnea, but he wouldn't wear the CPAP. April of 2013, he had a pulmonary embolus that damn near killed him. Nothing was done, maybe some meds. In June of 2013, he had 3 heart attacks at home that he misdiagnosed as indigestion, because if he ate 8 or 10 Tums, the pain went away. And he thought, well, you know, Kathy, I think maybe I had some heart attacks there. If I have another one, I think I'll go to the hospital. Well, after the next one, he woke up in the hospital after a major heart attack and was diagnosed also with hyperthyroidism, all of which goes along with this. So he had 2 stents placed in 2013. Those stents began to collapse, so in 2015, he had new stents put in the old stents. In 2016, he had dinner at our house to watch an LSU football game, and I said, Milton, please let me help you. So he shows up at the office, and we take some pictures. And he is not a healthy man. His face is bright red. He's got broken capillaries. He looks like he's half asleep. He's got a red mouth. He's got crowded teeth. He's got everything we look for. So here's were his initial symptoms. There are many of them, and we will go through them later. And again, let's look at his diagnostic casts to see if we get some hints. Well, first we look at those casts on the left, and we can see he's got some pretty good tori going on, and he's missing 2 upper bicuspids and a lower incisor, thanks to an orthodontist who did 3 on the floor. But unfortunately, it's given him a very deep bite with a trapped tongue and a big tongue and a linguatorium that didn't help grow, and it's insufficient for its needs. You can see they never could quite close those spaces, or even if they got them closed, his tongue probably pushed it open to try to keep him alive. That's the first time I started marking restricted tongues on when I learned how to keep them in the casts. Then we take a look at his linguatorium, and it's a high vaulted palate, not enough room for anything. And we look at his that lower right second molar and see it all scooped out like that. And I learned from Mark Cruz years ago that's a sign that they're clenching at night and they can't breathe. And actually, Dr. Bicknell had that. We fixed the teeth without fixing the cause. We see this a lot. It's what Mark calls the mortar and pestle effect from constant clenching in a dry, acidic environment. We'll see it in women more than you see it in men, and it's going to be the lower second molars that are worn out, because that's the upper molar, and that's the lower molar. So as the lower molar moves around in space against that big lingual cusp of the upper molar, the lower molar ends up paying the price, because the upper tooth has 3 roots and it's much more stable. So that lower molar becomes the sacrificial device we were talking about, and the body gladly gives up enamel and dentin to help keep that patient alive. And so this was pictures way back in Dr. Eric. This is that second molar that drops down into the lower one. So we see this all the time. It's a restorative nightmare. Obviously, many of you are restorative dentists who try to deal with this. But before we deal with it, it might be good if we figure out why. So we look at his oximetry. It scares the hell out of me. Obviously, he's got terrible obstructive sleep apnea. So we sent him to LSU for an overnight sleep study in which he had no N3 or no REM sleep, and an HI of 84. It's the highest apnea-hypopnea index I've ever seen. So what are you going to do? Are we just going to talk to him about the philosophy of getting better? Hell no, we're going to put him on a CPAP tonight. He might die before the next appointment. So we hook him up with a tap-pap mask and a CPAP, and now he starts wearing it. And we've also told him all these things that we're going to want to do, and how he has to change his breathing, so, and how he chews and how he swallows. So he's thinking about that. But at least now at night, he's not going to die in his sleep because he's wearing a CPAP. So we've accomplished his most important first step. He can breathe at night. But now it's time to see if we can work with him and an interdisciplinary team to see if we can help reverse his disease processes and improve his quality of life and the quantity of life. See if we can help him live longer while looking, sleeping, and feeling better. This is really where we leave dental sleep medicine management to promote functional breathing 24/7, 365. So maybe we could have kept him on a tap appliance. Maybe we could have kept him on a CPAP, but that's management. Let's see if we can help him cure. So October 2016, we added the pod with taping at night, got him off the CPAP. And the next steps, again, we've done all the patient education. We'd want to intervene as little as possible so that as he learns to regulate his breathing, it'll allow his body's physiology to correct itself through permitting homeostasis instead of that terrible allostatic situation he was in. So now he's trying to stand up straight a little bit, trying to breathe through his nose, keeping his mouth closed during the daytime, wearing the pod and tape at night. And he started 15 weeks of myofunctional therapy with Paula, along with training with the breather. And so now he knows the exercises to do, and he's working on toning his airway. We get his tongue released. And this is what the tongue release looks like. That little tendon there is peeled out. Now that's not just a tongue release. Now, you can get away with just going in with a laser and snipping that thing on a baby. But with an adult, that tongue is constricted to, it's got fascial adhesions running all the way back. This is just taking away one of the mechanical impediments to tongue mobility and allows opening the door to actually get in there and relieve everything that's restricted. And I know Dr. Zagi uses cotton-tipped applicators to do this. Dr. Banker uses what he calls his Marquette probes, which are his gloved fingers, and he just goes back and releases everything he can with blunt tissue dissection as far back as he can. And that's what it looks like when it's all opened up. So he's doing his work, he's working with the breather, he's doing the exercises, he's wearing the pod, he's wearing the tape. We sent him to Dr. Venden because he can't stand up straight. We're hoping now that all the tongue and its fascial restrictions are relieved, that with some body work, it'll permit him to maybe stand up straight because he's bent over like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. So he started working on postural changes and fascial release, doing the work while driving around in the car using his breather. And he noticed Dr. Venden was a vegan. And he thought, well, maybe if I eat a better diet, maybe that'll help. So he started eating a plant-based diet. So there's so many confounds and variables in what he did. If he actually got better, how do we know what of these things actually helped him? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. The only aggressive thing we did was a 4-minute surgery to release his tongue. Everything else is pretty simple. It's basically patient education, structural and functional improvement, and working on behavior. So has it helped him? Are there any changes? If so, can we see them? Can we measure some of them? This man was dying. Okay, in 2015, there was his oximetry. He can't get up to 90 all night, and he's sick. Okay, today, he might have too little hypopneas. Now, interestingly, his pulse rate is still a little bit high here, But we're 3 years later into this, and I'd love to see, I bet that's calmed down a whole lot. But obviously his pulse rate is stabilized, and you see it is slowing down during the night, which we want. And his SpO2 is vastly better, which suggests he's getting more oxygen into his blood than he did before. He has to. And because he's getting it through his nose and because he's using nitric oxide, it's probably creating enough vasodilation that he's really getting the oxygen to the red blood cells and that it's releasing to his body and brain. So I think his physiology and biochemistry of his breathing has helped a lot. That's what these little metrics tell us. Well, let's look at him. How do you look? How do you look? Oh my God, look at Milton. Now that's something. And he didn't even wear Homeoblocks. We didn't try to grow him an airway. We just tried to get him to use the airway he's got. Look at his face now. Look at it before. Let's see him coming alive. All right, here's a guy going to sleep, getting 2 years younger. Oh God, he doesn't look younger, he looks terrible. And he was terrible. He was a sick man. Let me try this again. But now we can see him waking up, standing up straight, getting better, feeling better, breathing better, eating better, sleeping better. And before we helped him, this is all medicine could do for him. There he is, made a comeback. And if you look at the side, the guy on the left, look how tired his eyes are. Look at his terrible skin color. Look at all that acute inflammation. Look how fatigued he is. And if you look on the right side, he just looks serene and healthier and better. But again, there he is, 2 years older. He's in his 70s. I mean, he's 75. He's my age. Does age matter? Well, maybe, did any of this help him stand up straighter? Could this have anything to do with why promoting good breathing in a kid can help prevent and cure scoliosis? I don't know. But when he walked into my office years earlier, that's what he looked like. Look at his face, look at his posture, look at his head position. And as he did the work and we treated him as simply as possible, man is rising up. So it's all about the tongue and the nose, but it shows in his eyes. Let's look at his eyes. Okay, and here's what he looked like when he walked in. That's 2 years younger. Here's 2 years older. Does this somehow reverse the aging process? I don't know, but it sure is exciting. I never had any hopes that we could do this kind of thing. And I tried it on myself primarily because everybody said it can't work. And damn if it didn't work. And so we said, well, hey, why don't we try these same concepts on other people as simply as possible? Let's see if we can go beyond managing them to actually helping them get well. So let's take a look at his symptoms. These were the symptoms he had before. So what improvements have happened that we can measure? We've measured his oximetry. We've measured how his face looks. We've measured that he's sleeping better. He doesn't snore anymore. He has no apneic events. His eyes that were all inflamed and puffy are all healed up. He's got greatly improved energy levels during the daytime. Doesn't have gastroesophageal reflux. Doesn't have to take Tums at all anymore. Used to wake up with a backache. Doesn't have a backache. Used to be anxious, isn't anxious, doesn't have to take his meds for anxiety anymore. Used to fall asleep with a hypnic jerk. That doesn't happen anymore because he has the proper transition from awake to sleep. By this time, he had lost 36 pounds. I would say without dieting, but he just changed what he was eating. His daytime pulse rate has dropped 10 beats. He used to have pain in his knee. It doesn't hurt anymore, probably because he doesn't weigh as much. He's standing up straight. His blood pressure is no longer hypertensive. He doesn't sweat at night anymore. He doesn't have a red oropharynx. Instead of getting up to pee 3 times a night, it's down to 1, which is normal. He was obese. He's now obese. He's not obese anymore. It's under control. His cholesterol has dropped 100 points. His lips used to be chapped. They're not. He doesn't have restless sleep. He sleeps through the night. And he's no longer diabetic. No longer diabetic. Jeff Rouse says, just do the dentistry, don't worry about the medicine. I walked out on a lecture by Hal Huggins 40 years ago who said, if you as a dentist have a patient who has diabetes and their doctors can't help them, and he was talking about nutrition, then you should help them yourself. I thought that's practicing medicine without a license. It's the most barbaric thing I've ever heard. I got in my car and drove back to Shreveport because I was indulging in contempt before investigation. And we did not help Milton because I wanted to cure his diabetes, but damn if it didn't. Now, that's pretty impressive. But as far as the dental sleep medicine outcome, he had a home sleep study and his AHI, which had been 84, was 1.7. He doesn't have apnea anymore. He had the most severe obstructive sleep apnea I've ever seen, and he was diabetic and hypertense. Now he's non-diabetic, non-hypertense, and has been cured of obstructive sleep apnea. What a gift from God to be able to help somebody like this. And here's an interesting postscript. Here's a program put on the Ornish Lifestyle Medicine. I mean, he is on board. He wants to do anything he can to be healthy. So he wanted to go sign up for this program. And they said, you're just too healthy. And when we saw him at dinner at the LSU game, he was dying. Draw your own conclusions. So there's an old Jewish saying from the old Jew Barry Rayfield, he who saves the life of one person, it is as if he has saved the life of the entire world. Well, that may be hyperbole, but I believe our team working together has saved Milton's life and the life of a lot of these individuals we've seen here. And I think it's just a blessing that we have been taught the things, has such wonderful teachers. And there is so much going on right now in our movement to right the ship, because this is very a critical time. It's still my conclusion, having lived this in myself and my patients, it's possible to develop a functional airway and train the patient to use it at any age. And of course, earlier is always better. It's a lot easier to bend that twig of childhood than it is to straighten up this gnarled old adult who's broken down and is obese and hypertense and has obstructive sleep apnea. And these are mostly our patients because they got a tongue that's in the wrong place, and all of those things need to be corrected because that twig wasn't bent in the right direction to start with. And it can be done early. Here's a BioBlock expander by Dr. Muse design. Kevin Boyd gave me these. He routinely is treating kids. How young? Or look at that appliance on the left side. Look at those two little appliances. Look at that dime. He's able to successfully develop the craniofacial respiratory complex and its structure, behavior, and functions in children that small. That is our future. You're going to begin to see this everywhere. You're going to see it in your patients. You're going to see it in your family. You're going to see it in your friends and possibly in yourself, as I did. In my family, here are 4 generations of dysautonomia because of incomplete development of the craniofacial respiratory complex. There I am in about 1950 with my grandfather. We have the same heads and faces. He was 6'4", I'm 6'6". Apparently it didn't keep us from growing vertically, but unfortunately, maybe it's because our faces grew too vertically, I don't know. But we've got the same heads and faces, and a few years later, he died from Parkinson's. Now, I think we've established that might have something to do with his breathing and the lymphatic system and the lack of function thereof. And I've had some of these symptoms. I threw myself out of bed during a dream and injured myself. But it's been 4 or 5 years since that happened. That's called REM behavior disorder. And if you have patients who have that, you better get them checked for Parkinson's, because that's an early sign for Parkinson's. And we've got these 4 grandchildren, and you can see they've got the same problems. Look at their faces. Henry on the bottom, he's overclosed, but Henry had lots of bad symptoms when he was a kid. But fortunately, with a little help, he's grown out of it. And you see Laney and Gus on the top, and Gus really didn't have the behavior problems, but now that he's had orthodontics, he's doing a lot better. He's got better facial shape, and Laney is doing hugely better. But the truth is, if you look at her vertical maxillary excess and her crowded teeth, that should have been fixed before she was that old. These were 2 of my lifelong best friends who had breathing problems, and I just didn't know it and didn't help them. That's my good friend Joe Beard, who gave me that book from 1925, and he died a painful death in bed from metabolic syndrome and an undiagnosable chronic inflammatory disease of his spine. And he had unmanaged obstructive sleep apnea. He had all the signs and all the symptoms. And he was kind of on a CPAP, but it just wasn't enough. Here's a picture way 52 years back. We just had our 52nd anniversary. That's me at my bachelor party in Memphis, Tennessee, and sitting behind me is my best friend, Rodney Cage. Rodney B. Cage. I spent my career in Louisiana, and he had his with IBM, and then for the last 30 years or so in Atlanta, Georgia, and we kept in close touch and traveled together, and were each other's best men and very involved with each other's life. He was my patient early on in the 1970s, and I really wish I had recognized then that he had a breathing problem when I was looking at his teeth, but I didn't. And finally, 8 years ago, when he was on here in Shreveport and visiting with his family, his wife said, "Something's wrong with Rodney. I need you to take a look at it. He's up all night." And so we did some metrics, long distance, and he had obstructive sleep apnea. So I sent him to a sleep medicine dentist in Atlanta to make him a TAP appliance, who referred him to a neurologist. And he had Parkinson's with Lewy body dementia, and he died in 2018. And he had these problems during his entire lifetime, and so did Joe. And if I'd known something maybe 40 years ago where we could have helped them, maybe they'd be alive today. I mean, you really can't beat yourself up for what you didn't know. But once you've learned it, you can beat yourself up if you don't apply it, so you don't make the same mistakes in the future. This is my dearly departed friend, Clyde Hargrove II. That's his obituary picture. He doesn't look very happy there because he wasn't. Picture on the right is a picture he sent of himself to me from Las Vegas for my 40th birthday. Clyde was the funniest person I ever knew. I played in a band with him for 35 years, And he would make me laugh so hard I'd have to put down my instrument and lie on the floor in the fetal position just laughing. That's from one of our last gigs with the hubcaps. That's before I treated myself and lost a lot of weight. So his band was Johnny Raymond and the Hubcaps from Outer Space, and he was Johnny Raymond, and I was the keyboard player, Dr. T. Cassoulet. We had a great time for 35 years. But he had anxiety and depression from obstructive sleep apnea, which I identified, 20 years ago. So we tried to tap, we tried to pod, we tried to CPAP. He wouldn't do it. We tried to get him to get his tongue released and get OMT. He wouldn't do it. So 2 years ago on Memorial Day, he put a bullet in his brain. We used to have a t-shirt that just said the hubcaps alive. And there's Clyde at his greatest. And my daughter redid that artwork, so now we have t-shirts that have Clyde on it, saying the hubcaps are still alive. But God, I wish He'd let me help him. And you're going to see this in your friends, and you can't help everybody, and it can be terribly frustrating. So in summary, I want to quote Dr. Ricketts. We've quoted people from 200 years ago. We've quoted people from 100 years ago. And let's quote Bob Ricketts from the 1950s. He had the first cephalometric x-ray outside of institutional dentistry and started taking pictures. He was an orthodontist and started looking at these kids and pretty much figured out in the 1950s everything we're talking today. And his first thing he said was, and it bears out, this is one of the things that got me looking at all this. Respiration and mastication are biologically inseparable. What affects one affects the other. Well, we've talked about that. He said this in 1955. He said the nose is a regulator, a cleaner, a vacuum cleaner, a sterilizer. How did he know it was a sterilizer? Nobody knew what nitric oxide was then, but he knew. And a primary sensory organ. The nasal cavity just happens to be formed by the maxilla, which also happens to be the basal structure for the upper teeth and most of the upper jaw. This is how they're so interrelated. And the floor of the nasal cavity also just happens to be the roof of the oral cavity. What affects one affects the other. It would appear that normal nasal breathing is conducive to normal growth of the occlusion of the teeth. The well-being of the whole child may be involved where mouth breathing is concerned. And the clinician dealing with conditions related to mouth breathing must look not only at the specific condition he's being asked to treat, but at all related conditions as well. Pretty good outline for what we should be doing today. And he said, therefore, it would seem that the time has come for the problem to be subjected to a multidisciplinary team of clinicians who can, as a team, treat the whole child. 1955. He said if we knew enough then to know this is what, especially his profession of orthodontics, he exhorted them in 1955, here's the problem, here's what we're missing, here's what we need to fix. It's my firm belief that if we can change the model of healthcare away from management of symptoms towards affecting wellness through functional breathing, we can reduce the incidence of chronic inflammatory disease or functional somatic syndromes in our population by 50% in one generation. So Ricketts in 1955 said, now is the time. That was 65 years ago. So if not now, when? Well, I don't think I'd be doing this video, and I don't think these 100 other speakers would be doing this. And I don't think there'd be this international Congress if the time weren't now. Because if we don't do it, who's going to do it, and if not now, when? That's what John Kennedy said. I think he was pretty much talking about putting a man on the moon. But this is why there's no turning back. Now is the time for 2020 breathing. So follow these leaders and others, most of whom I'm proud to say are my mentors, colleagues, and good friends. I've learned from all of them, and you can learn from all of them, and we're all learning from each other as we pool our resources for the greater good. So the title of this talk was 2020 Breathing Now, Nasodiaphragmatically. These have been stories from the road on the walks to wellness, including mine. It started out with a black hole of ignorance that I was in and what we've tried to do to climb out of it and what we've learned, the teachers we've had, the relationships we've made, the progress we've made, how we've tried to help ourselves and others, and I hope it's of some value. Because these, again, are terrifying times for those with disordered breathing. If there was ever a time for 2020 breathing, it's today when most of us have breathing problems. We may not all have the COVID, but half of us can't breathe at night. And we've all fallen into the disease of improper breathing and its comorbidities. And we can't get up unless dentistry leads the way to fix that. And today is the time for us to be thinking about, for instance, the benefits of nitric oxide. And I hope that this presentation has explained something of how important that is, why we need to use it, and why we need to use our own nitric oxide by breathing from our nose to our diaphragm and back 24 hours a day. Because we see all of these wonderful people who died from COVID, and as we looked at it, we realized they're all long-faced mouth breathers. Had they been breathing through their noses their whole lifetime and getting nitric oxide, perhaps they'd still be alive today. Who knows? But we do know we got a world full of kids walking around who are breathing through their mouth and they need help. And we got a lot of adults with the same problems. And I hope this presentation is of some use in helping you recognize these people so that you can identify their problems, offer to treat them, and maybe help transform them on the walk to wellness. As I said, this is the road to wellness. Ideally, these children should run down it as early as possible because they develop correctly. And even as they get older, they need to go down that road without any baggage before they get so sick and tired and sick and tired of being sick and tired that they have to rely on a CPAP or an oral appliance or medication. And yes, it's a long road, it's a walk, it's not a run, but if we help each other, maybe we can help one person at a time learn to run, not walk. And as we all hunt down the causes and solutions of this problem, and more of us can begin to run, and if we can walk in harmony like my idols, the Beatles, then more of us and more of us and more of us can be involved in this until perhaps working together, we will save our species from self-annihilation. In 2015, this was like rolling a rock up the hill. We didn't know a whole lot, and what we did know, we couldn't get other people to listen, and we thought this will never happen. About 2016, it got better because Carstensen and the ADA said, hey, we need to look at children's breathing. Of course, changing a philosophy and changing dental schools are two different things, and it may be a pretty good while before all of this needs to be in the undergraduate curriculum so every dentist can understand this, starting with gross anatomy and physiology, and understand how it's something they should promote for every patient, and that the first thing they should look for at every patient is to see how they breathe. So we really hit a plateau in 2016, and I thought, well, I can go on and die now. Nothing's going to happen, but damn, now we're doing this Congress. This thing is rolling downhill in a hurry. I may actually not die before we see big changes. And I want to thank the producers of this Congress who asked me to expose my ignorance in these 3 videos. It's been like passing a 500-pound kidney stone, but it sure feels better. It was a great honor to be able to try to organize my thinking in a way that I hoped I could express it while telling stories to someone who might be interested. And bless you for being involved with this. And I look forward to seeing what the future holds for all of us.